Welcome to the DooDoo Diva Smells Like Money podcast. I'm your host, Suzan Chin-Taylor, CEO and founder of Creative Raven, the firm that helps wastewater industry contractors and manufacturers unlock the power of digital marketing, AI, and PR to boost sales and opportunities. Whether it's through our online marketing and lead generation programs or providing a fully outsourced marketing department, we are passionate about helping businesses in the wastewater and civil infrastructure sectors not just survive, but thrive in today's digital world. Each episode, I'll be bringing you expert tips and strategies to help you grow and succeed. Let's dive in. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the DooDoo Diva Smells Like Money podcast. We are wrapping up our three-part series with Dr. Heather Fenyk, who is a Rutgers University lecturer, and that is in New Jersey, for those of you who may not be familiar with and where Rutgers is, as well as the founder and board president of the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership. And we've had some delightful and I would say very thought-provoking conversations in our last two episodes. And we're going to wrap up this series in talking about what some of you may bristle at this because it might be considered political, and we'll try not to go there, but oh well, because it's something that really needs to be talked about. And that is environmental justice in water management. And also the disparity in the access to clean, drinkable water around the world. And I want to preface this by, for those who may not be familiar or heard of a big event that the UN put on several years back, and it was called the International Water Woman Conference. And I believe that was the name of it. And they invited women from all over the world who were involved in water. And this also included women who were tribal leaders or, important members of communities from all over the globe. And what came out of that was that since probably the dawn of time, women, and you're listening and sitting in and tuning in to Two Women of Water, that women historically have been responsible for the protection and the gathering and bringing of water to their communities. And so therefore they were charged with protecting that water. And in poorer communities, we don't want to think about it here in the United States, but there are still places around the world where women are charged with sometimes walking miles with empty jugs on their heads to get to a source of water to bring back to their homes to use for cooking and for drinking or, whatever their needs may be. And so, we're very blessed here that we can turn on our taps and get that. However, even in this country, there are some issues with pollution and its impacts from upstream pollution due to, whatever wet weather events or industry or whatnot. And it most affects poorer communities. And so therefore, the term environmental justice. And we're going to talk about the importance of developing environmental justice communities and how we can make things more equal and improve water quality across the board. Because good water quality, in my mind, don't know if you agree, I see it as a right, and it should not be only for the most fortunate or financially advantaged of us. It really should be something that everybody has access to because water is life. And I don't want to, capitalize on this, but for those who know me, behind me on the wall is a picture of Gandhi. And Gandhi, it was not a very popular known quote. Everybody knows the one, "We must be the change." But he said early on, as India was getting its independence, that sanitation is as important, if not more so, than our freedom, because he understood that the sanitation problem with wastewater and the waterways being polluted was tantamount and critical to the country maintaining its health. Because if we have no health, we have nothing. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Heather to talk about this concept of environmental justice and the disproportionate impact by upstream pollution.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. It's a wonderful intro to sort of get a sense for how this is a global issue. What I can speak to most immediately is my local New Jersey concerns around environmental justice, but this is an absolute global issue that our water health, our access to clean water for drinking, for washing, for recreation, the benefits, the opportunities of clean water disproportionately go to wealthier individuals, wealthier communities. So in terms of environmental injustices, what we have done in the Lower Raritan Watershed in central New Jersey has been to start by trying to understand the extent and scope of injustice. So we have tried to first prioritize analyses that would help us understand who is at risk and what are all of the different sort of pieces of the puzzle that put different groups more at risk. So let's take our flooding, our climate trends, our soil pollution, and overlay that with census tract information, racial, demographic, other social and health data variables, so that we know who is at risk, so that we can support those communities that are less resourced. The last episode, Susan, you and I talked about how do you prioritize interventions?
Yes.
One of the very first things we feel we must do is gather the data so that we can prioritize interventions to reduce risks to those who are most vulnerable, who perhaps, those communities that are less resourced, those communities that often really are downstream of, polluters in one way or another, or those communities that have been, developed to the point where, quite honestly, some have thought there's no hope for renaturalization or renaturing or, any type of restoration of that landscape. We need to prioritize funds to address the needs of the most vulnerable. So for us, that data gathering exercise, figuring out what the most egregious risks are is paramount. In New Jersey, we also are wrestling with a situation which is not that uncommon nationally. I think maybe about a third of the US states are home rule states, which basically means that land use decision making at the municipal level does not necessarily have to take into consideration the impact of decisions on downstream neighbors. This is not regional planning. This is sort of municipal, fiefdom decision making that's done for the immediate economic benefit or immediate, environmental health benefit within a particular political boundary. But what we know, working as advocates for watershed level planning, is that our pollutant flows know no boundaries. And again, it's often the case that our downstream communities are impacted. But pushing back against home rule to support bigger watershed systematic thinking about ecological functions. We are all part of a watershed. How does our watershed work? How does it work in terms of inputs, waste inputs, and waste outputs? Let's do some thinking both about energy flows and hydrologic flows and resource flows, as well as and by resource, I initially meant environmental resource flows, but now I mean our resource in terms of funding flows. Let's talk about regional cost sharing to address the ills of upstream impacts on our downstream neighbors, even if it means that our upstream neighbors should take out of their pockets funds to remove the combined sewers in their low-lying neighbors backyards. So another huge environmental issue, justice issue for us is another prioritization exercise, and it's looking at communities that are most at risk of climate change. And again, it is often the case that it's our poor or lower socioeconomic status, Black, brown communities that are most vulnerable. How do we do risk communication at a watershed level and support communities in relocating, if need be, away from harm's way? And also, how do we support even transportation access planning, away from flood hazard areas? How can we take a regional or state or bigger picture view to how to get people out when there is an emergency? And that must be done at a regional level or a watershed level or a bigger picture state or national level. So, one other huge piece of the puzzle for us, and I think that I'll stop here, Susan, is supporting local ecological knowledge through civic science or citizen science practices, and supporting our communities and holding the local data. Having a compendium of historic maps, having the local data of water quality, of soil quality, of just all data that has been collected locally, over a period of time that folks can repeatedly revisit and analyze for, with as new information about risk comes to play. Let's support our community members in understanding how to do the analyses so that they can make informed decisions about their own risk. So that was a lot, but
no, I mean that's true, because it's all about the data. You can't just take a guess and say, well, I think that this is what is happening. No, you have to know what is happening so that you can make the right plan.
Right.
And I think it also comes down to what you were saying earlier with the home rule, not weighing in on this, but is that many times when things are getting developed or planned or done, that there's a failure to ask the next question. And I had a friend of mine who really shared this with me, God rest his soul. And he said, whenever you're trying to make a decision on something important, always make sure you ask yourself the next question. And I said, Mr. Mike, what do you mean by the next question? He said, the next question should always be, and then what happens? And sometimes our best intentions, without asking what could be the possible consequences of going in a direction, and am I prepared to deal with whatever those variables might be, to be truly prepared for it.
Right.
And so, that you had mentioned when we were offline about that there are some mayors in what one would consider very conservative areas and affluent areas are now starting to see that because they have the ability to, and that eventually things will start going upstream and it'll begin to affect them, is that they're starting to become strong partners in these types of shifts and restoration efforts. And I'm just going to share an example that I was told by a good friend who is an engineer in Mumbai, is that for years, years and years and years, every year when the monsoons would come, because they've paved over and paved over, and there's no place for the water to go with the impervious surface. They've even paved over storm drain inlets. It's crazy. They can't find manhole openings or manhole access points for the sewer systems because they've been asphalted over. Okay. So they said that this just went on and nobody complained about it. Nothing was done. But now over the last several years, or maybe in the last decade, things are starting to happen slowly. And the reason being is because now those problems with the flooding are now starting to reach the very affluent areas of Mumbai. Now, many people may not know this, but globally, Mumbai is the most expensive real estate in the world. An average 1,000 square foot flat in Mumbai in a high rise starts at about 2 million US. We're not talking 2 million rupee, 2 million US. And that's a cheap one without very many amenities. And so imagine during these floods and the sewage and the whatnot is coming up, and you've got mama getting ready to go to a party or a wedding or whatever she's going to, and she's dressed in her very expensive silk sari, and she comes down to get to her car, and now she is more than ankle deep in a combination of flood and sewage water. She's not going to be happy about that. And so it took, the wealthy who are being negatively impacted by this. I go, no, this will not do. Then now something is happening. And so I guess the reason why I'm bringing this up is that in looking at the upstream and the downstream, as you said, you can ignore it, but eventually that problem is just going to keep growing. And eventually I see it just like it did there. It will eventually work its way upstream little by little to the affluent communities. And by the time that happens, it's going to be a problem of such enormous proportions. You're going to have to throw a tremendous amount of money at it to fix it in your own backyard. And so, like you were saying, I throw out the challenge, if this is happening and you're becoming aware of it, why not start working on it now and getting ahead of the curve and working downstream so that it never reaches upstream? Just saying. Thoughts on that, Dr. Heather?
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, we should. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's really often the case, isn't it, that folks have their own best interest in mind?
Right.
So, that said, uh, reflecting on the historic injustices that we have levied through our land use decision making. Going back to your prior conversation, or your prior comment about your friend said, well, then what? What happens next? What happens next, not just at the edge of your own backyard or your neighbor's backyard or your own municipal boundary, but how far do these ripples of action, take you? And what happens next for every single decision you make with respect to how we're using our land? This is not done in a vacuum, and supporting everyone, rich, poor, in a really profound shift in understanding how decisions affect others. Going to the future will be, I think, move us forward in reducing what are potentially catastrophic harms, coming around the bend for us. But at every step of the way, for every decision we make, who beyond ourselves, beyond our neighbors, stands to be affected by this? And will we continue to make these same decisions if we have that bigger picture, bird's eye view of, impacts, trickle down impacts, downhill impacts, global impacts?
Absolutely. So, I really want to thank you for the work that your organization is trying to do in just the data collection, the community outreach, incorporating arts, getting the community buy-in, all of the engagement, but just providing these kind of tools for communities who, may want to start taking a different stance. Like you were saying, let's look beyond just our little box, that say, okay, well, I want to make the most informed decision possible, that organizations like yours, and maybe there's others out there that have been gathering this data, but to really avail themselves of all of this educational material, all of this historical data, so that we can maybe answer our own question as to, and then what happens? We come up with our own answers so that we are making the best move, like you were saying, not just in our best interests, but those are going to be maybe not our community, but even when you think about generationally, not just for me in this moment, but what's it going to be like for my children and my grandchildren and my grandchildren's children? Do we want to leave this place better than we found it? And I truly believe that most people do hold that in their heart, that they want to leave and make a positive impact somehow in their life. And sometimes it can be just maybe one small thing of putting a rain garden out in front of your building. I mean, it could be something as simple as that. And so, Doctor, I really want to thank you for sharing all, the generosity of your time in talking about these, somewhat technical, but very thought-provoking subjects as it relates to water and water management, and how we all have to be good stewards of this resource that we rely on really for our existence, our life. And so for those listening who would like to know more about some of the things that you do, the data you provide, and how you're helping communities, really plan for the future, how can they learn more about this work?
Sure. Yeah. So the organization is called the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership. We have a web presence at lowerraritanwatershed.org. We are on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram. We have a YouTube presence. As I mentioned before, Susan, we love to get folks out in the field with us, engaging in data gathering, the boots on the ground, civic science, environmental monitoring, and supporting deep connection to our landscapes. If you're not from the area but visiting, reach out to us, and we're happy to take you on a tour of our space so you can see how of our watershed, how we engage with our watershed in creative ways, and hopefully, perhaps we might inspire you also to do civic science, community engaged work. And Susan, let me just also say, I would love to perhaps come on again sometime to talk about how we can sort of think of not just human rights or environmental rights, but rights for our rivers and watersheds. I don't know if you know, but there is a global movement to establish legal rights for waterways in India, in Australia, even in the United States. And that's taking some of our conversation, a couple of steps further, going beyond environmental justice and community rights in those terms to, who is this justice work also benefiting? And it's our natural landscape.
I love it. Absolutely would love to have you back on the show to talk about that. So listeners, stay tuned for when that might happen. All right. Well, again, Dr. Fenyk, this has been an absolute delight. I hope you, audience, have enjoyed it as well and gotten something out of this series. It certainly has been enlightening for me, especially getting to learn a little bit more about my old stomping grounds and the community where I grew up and played and recreated when I was a young person. And so again, thank you for coming on the show. And listeners, thank you for sharing your valuable time with us. And until next time, keep it flowing. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you're ready to take your marketing to the next level and start increasing sales and opportunities for your business, reach out to us at Creative Raven. We're here to help you thrive in the digital landscape. Visit creativeraven.com or click the link in the show notes below to schedule a call and learn how we can support your growth. If you enjoyed the insights on today's episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you'll never miss an update. Until next time, keep growing and keep it flowing.